And now on the line is George Jacob from Self Help Africa. George, welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me on, Darren.
Okay, George, we are doing this interview today to talk about your Tigray appeal. Could you start off by giving me a summary of Self Help Africa's involvement in the region over the years, and then tell us what is happening to cause you to have this big appeal that you have at the moment?
The situation is like Self Help Africa is a Irish charity that works in agricultural development in sub-Saharan Africa, and we have worked in Ethiopia for the past 35 years now. That's mainly working with small-scale farmers, helping them to grow more and earn more from small farms. Now, the situation in Tigray, Tigray is a region in the far north of Ethiopia. It borders Eritrea, which goes out onto the Red Sea, and it is basically a region that has, there's been some kind of there's been political unrest for some time since late last year, and as a result of that, farmers haven't been able to farm, crops aren't in the ground, and there is a real danger of a serious famine, possibly the worst famine that the world has seen in the past decade.
Okay, I read two very informative articles in The Guardian yesterday on what is going on in the region. Am I right in saying that yourselves, Self Help Africa, and other development or aid organisations are generally staying outside of taking sides in the military conflict that is going on there?
Yeah, well. Generally speaking, NGOs, non-government organisations like ourselves, and international aid agencies, we don't get involved in the politics of these things. But our concern is with the people, and in our case, our focus is always on on rural, poor farming communities. Our focus since the organisation was started is on helping people to produce the food that they need, because that food doesn't only provide them with dinner in the evening, it provides them with an income that allows them to send children to school, put a roof over their heads, and look after their health and other needs. And our focus in Tigray now is on the people, the communities. Yeah, if you're reading in the last few days, there are kind of worrying warnings that up to 4 and 5 million people could need aid in the not too distant future, and right now there are several 100,000 people that are at risk of starvation. A lot of them children.
Okay, just without taking sides on the conflict threat, and just one question about it: Are the soldiers from Tigray in effect fighting for independence for the region from Ethiopia, George?
It's a little bit more sort of complicated than that. Like Ethiopia had a government in the 1990s that was 1980s and until the 1990s that was sort of a Marxist regime, and it was overthrown by forces from Tigray who allied themselves with forces from Eritrea to the north. And after that, for quite some time, the tribal people from Tigray were the biggest political power in Ethiopia, and they were in government. Now the government changed a few years ago, and the Tigrayan people are no longer the government in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and that could be the origins of the current conflict between Tigray and the government of Ethiopia.
So
who have been kind of fighting up there, as I say, since last November, December.
Do they kind of want their own country? Do they?
I don't know. Actually, is the answer if they want their own country, or if they want to be back in power in Ethiopia, or if they want a restoration of the previous regime. It's difficult to say from the outside, and of course with with COVID-19 and everything else happening over the last year and a half, we have had no travel. Like all of our local all of our local all of our local staff are Ethiopian anyhow, but none of the Western people who work with our organization have actually traveled to Ethiopia since very early last year, and all of this situation has erupted since the latter part of 2020.
And last week, I believe 3 people from Medicine Sans Frontiers were actually murdered in the region, weren't they? So
yes, yeah, but that was something that I heard when we were speaking earlier the other day. I have to admit, it wasn't something I had kind of been aware of myself at the time. I possibly should have been, but it is a very difficult situation, and it is extremely kind of tricky to work in a situation when there are two sides in conflict. Now, I was just looking at the news before your call, and I saw the reports from yesterday as well, were that the Tigrayans had retaken the regional capital Mekelle, which had been occupied by Ethiopian forces. So the situation is very much in flux, Darren, and unfortunately, innocent bystanders, in this case, kind of aid workers that don't take sides, as you said earlier, and also local people who are just trying to get by and farm their small farms. They can get caught up in these things, and they often bear the brunt of conflicts like this. We see it all over the world. It's why there are such an enormous number of displaced people. We see it in Syria, we see it in kind of the other parts of the Middle East, and we see it in parts of Africa as well. Where there's conflict, it is rural, poor, vulnerable people who end up bearing a huge burden as a result.
And Ethiopia has made big strides economically, I believe, in the last decade or two, hasn't it? Even though the population of the country has grown hugely.
Yeah. Well, the population of Ethiopia has been. It's often said that famine is a result of an inability of the land to support the number of people that are living on the land. Or are reliant on the food that land can yield. In the case of Ethiopia, that isn't the case. Like 150 years ago, there was something of the order of 10 million people in Ethiopia. More recently, it's about 110 million. So there's been massive population increase over 120, 150 years in the country, but it has become quite prosperous. It's a vast area of land. That's one thing you'd have to say. And there are a lot of, the White Nile goes down through Ethiopia. It's got a lot of lakes. There are very dry areas, but there are also areas that have been really successfully farmed. And the Tigrayan region also has been a breadbasket for Ethiopia for decades as a result of farming practices and terracing, like introducing alternate crops, and just hardworking people working the land. So it hasn't. It hasn't. It's very well known. Older people who may be listening to the program will remember Ethiopia from the Bob Geldof time, the Live Aid and Band Aid appeals when there was a famine in the early 80s. But since then, the country has experienced a lot of prosperity. And in Addis Ababa, the capital, they actually opened a light rail service 5-6 years ago, which is a real signifier of kind of economic growth. And a lot of the former shanty towns that were a part of that city, gave way to kind of high-rise kind of office blocks and hotels and what have you. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't wealthy people and also very poor people. Our experience in our work is that people that live in rural areas and people that live in more remote rural areas are often the poorest.
Okay, and you mentioned the famine in the mid '80s in Ethiopia. It was actually the same region, Tigray, wasn't it? But did that famine happen
Yeah,
in
it
it?
was. It was up in Tigray, and at that time, the famine was actually blamed not on a shortage of food, but on sort of political maneuverings that were happening at that time that prevented certain kind of tribal groups from being able to access food. So sometimes, like, conflict
It's the same
is,
thing
like,
today, really, isn't it? Kind of.
conflict can lead to hunger and famine, unfortunately.
Okay. Okay, people have been killed and are being killed in the military conflict. George, is it that we're on the verge of a famine in the region, or are people today actually dying of hunger already, like in the region?
I think, yeah, people are dying of hunger already. The UN are warning that kind of, yeah, like large numbers are at risk. That, they reckon that 900 or 900,000 people don't have enough food, and basically the situation is that more vulnerable, poorer people will be without food now. So aid, if it doesn't get to them, they will die of starvation. It is that dark at present. But the other thing to keep in mind is that the last 3 months would have been the season for tilling land, for planting crops that would be harvested in the months to come. Because of the conflict, a lot of farmers just simply haven't been able to start planting, start growing the food that they need for the year ahead. So that's why the language is around, like a lot of the time it's around looming famine. It's because there are very good predictors now as a result of the experience of some of the terrible famines that have happened in the past. There are early warning systems. There are ways that kind of systems, the UN systems, can detect where there is vulnerability, and there is a sense at the moment that in the months ahead things could get very dark indeed for the people of Tigray.
Okay, George, can you tell me what yourselves and Self Help Africa are calling for in the region, and can you tell me a bit more about your donations appeal in general?
Sure. Well, basically, what we're doing, Darren, is we have kind of we've launched an appeal for the people in Tigray, and what we are doing is we're working with local partners, including a relief agency that's run by the Catholic Church up in the north of Ethiopia. They have people on the ground, they're local staff, and the method of aid being provided isn't like the traditional image is often of food being handed out of the back of trucks to people that don't have food. That is how kind of aid, humanitarian aid, was traditionally administered. In more recent times, the way aid is provided to people is actually in the form of money vouchers, that they receive money that they can then use themselves in local markets to buy the food that they need. And it gives them control over, like, specifically what they need, and like we are kind of monitoring what food prices are in local markets. Food can come in to an area to assist people. And there is also, there is the food aid, but there is also food that has been grown and is being sold, and it is a way of not. Again, it's a complicated, it's a complex balance between providing people with what they need, but also not depressing local markets so that people that do grow food, suddenly they can't sell it because there is all this kind of international food aid has flooded local markets. So there is a balance there, and the people on the ground kind of understand that, and the agencies on the ground understand that. But what we're doing is we are, in the main, we are distributing aid in the form of kind of funding to families that are selected as being by our local partners as being particularly vulnerable. And I think it's the equivalent of $50 is provided to a family for a month, and that provides them with the ability to buy a month's supply of food.
Okay, George, come towards the end of our interview. Is there anything else you want to tell our listeners on Near FM about your work in Tigray?
No, if they want to go to our website, it's selfhelpafrica.org. They will find kind of details of what is happening, and there is information there as well on like what is kind of happening, and what people can give and what that will provide. So basically what we're saying is for a month, it will, gifts will provide 4 families with emergency food packages that they, where they can purchase wheat, pulses, cooking oil, and, and other supplies that they need.